Welcome to the U2U Connect Show here on RCR TV. I'm Limor Schafman, show host, and it's great to be with you. Today we're going to be talking about agricultural M2M, the farming revolution. And helping us understand what is going on in this sphere is Mark Lewellen. He is Manager of Spectrum Advocacy for John Deere. Thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome. Nice to be here.
So one of the things that we were talking about is, and that I've been paying attention to, is that machinery automation has been part of farming for quite a while, multiple decades. But it seems that particularly because of broadband coupled with technology, hardware and software, that now there's this sort of revolution that's happening in the agricultural spaces. Would you see that that's what you're seeing?
Right. I guess I would say maybe we're in the next generation of improvements on agriculture and technology.
Mm-hmm.
The one improvement that you talked about a couple decades ago would be in the early 90s when we started talking about precision agriculture and using GPS to guide these machines. But now what we're talking about is kind of bringing IT into the picture. So bringing that type of technology into the farms is going to provide, we hope, as much revolution as mechanization did with tractors 100 years ago.
And I would say from what I've been seeing that that's actually something that's going to be necessary, because last week I was at a think tank presentation by the Center for Strategic and International Affairs Studies, and they were saying that the world population is going to grow to 9.6 billion by 2050. It's only 37 years from now.
Not that far.
Really, not that far at all. And actually what they said is going to require 60% more food to feed everyone. And so whether or not one agrees with the numbers, I think that's just, the fact that we have 37 years to get to that point is rather astonishing.
Yes, I would agree. There's quite a few worldwide trends that are going on that are going to benefit this whole area. One of the ones you mentioned is the growth in population. So that's a big thing. We also have people in general have rising incomes around the world, which leads them to want better things, better diets, more protein, for example, which means you need crops to feed the protein and crops to feed the people. So that all kind of bodes well for us. There's also a lot of migration from rural areas into the cities. So the people that are left in rural areas have to do more with less. So there's more room for mechanization and technology and automation there, as well as we actually have a construction division, which most people may not realize, but we have a construction and forestry division, and they build things like roads and cities and bridges for the city aspect. So it all works out well for John Deere.
You're in a position. So now actually, let's take a step back. So to define, so everyone knows what we're talking about, agriculture, which is what we're generally going to be talking about today, as defined by John Deere, what does that include?
Well, I'd say, agriculture, crops, livestock, forestry, mining, things of that ilk. I wouldn't necessarily consider like fishing and hunting probably would not fit under that category from our point of view, but the other ones certainly would.
Okay. And one of the things I found fascinating, is, especially when I first heard you speak on the Hill for a PCIA event to advocate for broadband, actually, in front of the Senate, John Deere is built on the ground. It's like it was built from the very first product that was made to till the earth, and now they're dealing with the ethers, with Spectrum.
Right.
So what's going on? What is John Deere paying attention to that we need to know about that they're seeing, and why is John Deere headed in this direction?
Well, good question, and maybe it's one reason why I have a job with John Deere now as Spectrum Manager. A lot of people probably don't realize it about the company, but I mean, of course, we're known for making these big green iron machines for years and years and years. But what we've been doing the last 15 years or so is moving much more into the technology space. So we mentioned in the early 1990s, we introduced precision agriculture, which used GPS to be able to control your machines down to a very accurate level. For example, if you're a human being driving a 30-foot combine, for example, and you might have a field that's half a mile or a mile long, I defy you to drive that in a straight line, okay? And you're also going to overlap maybe 3 feet on each edge to make sure you catch everything. Well, if we can use GPS to control your machine down to an inch or two, we've eliminated that overlap. So we've just saved you 10% off the bat. Time, energy, labor, et cetera, and we can drive that machine exactly straight up and down that mile-long row. So it saves you fatigue, it saves you inputs, and it increases your yields. So it's all music to the farmer.
So explain that. I want to make sure that everyone understands where this is going because it blew my mind. So your systems are actually literally driving the person who's sitting behind the wheel is no longer.
Well,
really, to what extent is this happening?
Yeah, it's not quite like an unmanned aircraft or remote control.
But we'll probably get there though.
Yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there. What happens in this situation would be that the GPS would basically take over not take it over, but drive your machine in the parallel rows up and down your fields.
Okay.
The driver still is in charge, still can stop the machine, still has overall responsibility, and still needs to make the turns at the end of the rows.
But still, the fact that the machine can do that kind of precision is absolutely massive. It's incredible.
Right, and it leads to all kinds of really good things for the farmers. Variable rate seeding, for example, being able to put less seed in where you know your field is not all that productive, but putting more seed in where you know it's going to be productive, and things of that nature. So it definitely increases the farmers' inputs, or decreases their inputs.
Right, so, and then it sounds like not only does it help in the actual management of actually dealing with the crops, but also I would think the capture of the data.
Yes.
Coming off a field in terms of their yields, and we planted this much, and this is how, I mean, the precision farming is precision across the board for the farmers.
Right, so now we're basically able to create yield maps, maybe down to maybe a square meter on your field, so of course that creates a pretty big data file. But now when you've got the information, now you can use that to drive your spring prescription planning in the spring. So in fact, we're going to be showing that to some folks later on.
Tell me a little bit about the system that you're actually providing, and how does it work? And
Okay.
just a little bit about the product, but not, and sort of the nitty-gritty of some of the applications, how it's being used.
Right, our system that we are selling these days is called JDLink, and believe it or not, you probably know a lot more about it than you think. All it is a cell phone modem that's installed in our ag and construction machines. So for example, we've been installing this modem in the construction equipment since 2006, and we liked it so much we added it to the ag side in 2011. So basically all self-propelled ag equipment has JDLink. So what this does is it's making cell phone calls. Now it's not Miss Combine calling up Mr. Tractor for a date, on Saturday night, but it's telematic data. It's information about how the machine is operating, how long it's operating, how long it's been on idle. We're finding out that just that basic level of information is very useful to the farmer. For example, they don't know until they have the system that their tractor may be idling up to 30% of the time. Okay, now that's a lot of time idling, and nothing good happens if you're idling. Okay, you're wasting fuel, you're polluting the atmosphere, and you're depreciating your machine. So nothing good happens. So if you can know that, well, now you can manage it to eliminate it or reduce it and maybe get it down to 10 or 20% or whatever you want. But that's just on a very basic level, that's what JDLink allows. Now, we're moving into much more sophisticated applications. For example, we have something called RDA, Remote Data Access. You're probably familiar with the ability to share a computer screen between people that are hundreds, thousands of miles away. It's basically the same thing, except the screens are a screen in a combine or a tractor, and the dealer can share and see that screen back at his dealership. So if you've just downloaded a new software update, it's not quite working right, rather than going all the way back to the dealer, you can call him up, have him share his screen with you, and he can hopefully fix it for you on the spot. We've also just announced coming out in 2014 wireless data transfer. I mentioned these yield data maps that we create are pretty big files. So in the past, the only way to physically move that data around was to download it to a flash drive and then physically carry it around from field to field, back to your farm, back to your agronomist. It's a mess. So with wireless data transfer, we can now move that data around wirelessly and save a lot of people time and money. So hopefully that's going to be a very big thing for farmers.
So are you seeing John Deere then add a whole services component to its offerings, that it's not just about the hardware, and I mean the tractor hardware?
I guess that would be a fair statement, yes.
Okay, because I think one of the things that I'm seeing more and more with M2M is that it's enabling, not only are we dealing anymore with just the products and the machine-to-machine literally connecting, or even just the big data, but it's like services are, not only new products are being developed, and also new services are being offered by companies as a result. So it's a whole new product lines, quote unquote, are being opened up
Right.
for companies such
Right.
as yours.
Right. Yep, exactly. I mean, even a really simple example would be maybe third-party applications now are available to be developed. Now everybody has smartphones, more or less. So there's an application out, I don't know the name of it, but it's to help, not prevent rollovers, but I'm not a farmer, but I'm told that there's two types of farmers. There's the ones that have rolled their tractor and ones that are going to roll their tractor. So if you do that, probably out in the North 40, maybe out by yourself. So if your accelerometer on your smartphone says, hey, you just rolled over, it'll come up and ask you, hey, did you just do a somersault or are you in trouble? And if you can't respond, then it starts sending out emails and hopefully somebody comes to get you because you could be unconscious
Right.
or pinned or unable to respond. So that's a very simple example of a third-party application that's coming because of communications.
Right. So not only is it, again, things that John Deere is doing, but there are so many different opportunities, actually, for people who want to pay attention to the agricultural space in terms of where M2M is taking and to offer different kinds of products and solutions to it.
Yep.
So talk to me about a little bit about the 2G, 3G situation. How is broadband doing in our rural communities? What's some of the things that are happening? What are things that we need to be paying attention to as a telecommunications industry because we are from RCR Wireless? And maybe what are some of the things that we could be doing about it or taking advantage of the situation and bringing spectrum out to these communities?
Okay, that's a whole lot of questions.
Yes.
So maybe we can maybe take them one at a time at the beginning. You mentioned 2G and 3G. From a John Deere perspective, we're always going to be somewhat behind the leading edge of consumer electronics. We're never going to be right up there with the leading edge there. So, for example, just this year, we've transitioned from 2G modems on our machines to 3G modems. And now everything rolling off the assembly line is a 3G AT&T modem. That has helped us quite a bit. There's actually more coverage with 3G in the U.S. now than there is 2G, so that helped us. But we are running into quite a bit of issues regarding coverage in rural America. As you can imagine, the cell phone companies, and rightly so, have developed their towers and network plans to cover where people live and work and travel. Well, what we're now talking about, I think, is maybe somewhat of a new paradigm. We talk about M2M and the Internet of Things. So now, like we've explained, I hope, is that our machines are now going to be making cell phone calls from cotton fields or wheat fields or corn fields, where we haven't had traditionally people making cell phone calls before. So maybe the cell phone companies need to start thinking about counting modems and not just people, because one person may represent how many? 5, 10, 15, right. 20 modems, and more to come. So.
Right.
I think that would be one paradigm shift I think we need to take into account.
So that actually sounds like it might be even different business models that the telecom companies need to come up with in order to address this specific marketplace.
Right. Now, I'm probably not going to argue that the M2M traffic will in and of itself generate enough business to justify putting up a new cell tower. Mm-hmm. But I think it will in some cases make what is now a marginal case become economical. Mm-hmm. So I think in that sense there is some room for private sector to come in and help us with this. I think there is a lot of things going on, not just John Deere. I mean, I'm here for John Deere, of course, but other companies are doing similar things, different names. We hope we do it better, but everybody's trying to do this big data, lots of wireless connectivity, and it's not just private sector. I mean, the government needs it too. It's good for things like submitting crop insurance, for example. It's very helpful for the government if we can submit it wirelessly than sending them reams of paper. So it's good for everyone.
Right. And I would think actually that data, as you said, there's so much data being captured. It needs to be parsed, it needs to be distributed to different people, it needs to be parsed out, it needs to be analyzed. I mean, even that in itself is something, frankly, that the telecommunications companies, as part of their business enterprise solutions areas, could be very interested in.
Yep.
So there's opportunity there. So when you're looking a little bit at the future, and one of the things, I'm sorry that we were at the John Deere offices, just so you know, here in Washington, D.C., which is exciting. Thank you very much for listening, I guess.
No problem.
One of the slides that I really liked that you showed was that expansion of spectrum or the expansion of, not the
Phone
spectrum,
calls.
of phone
Those phone
calls
calls, right.
that John Deere was having over the course of time. And I know we don't have the visual for it. Maybe we could just, eventually I can hook that in with the final YouTube. But can you describe that a little bit to our audience? What was that really showing? Because I think that's really quite important.
Sure. As we said, we started installing JDLink, which is a cell phone modem, on our construction equipment only back in 2006. So if I showed you a map of where our construction stuff was making cell phone calls, there'd be a few dots around Appalachia, some down around some other urban areas, and a few up in North Dakota for some strange reason. If we look at 2008, 2010, up to 2011, you'll start to see more and more dots as we're selling more and more equipment and they're making more and more calls. You'll also start to see areas where the dots start to form lines. So that would be an area where you're doing construction, maybe new roads or repaving a road or even maybe along a waterway or maybe locks or something like that. But you can start to see a whole lot more activity year on year. In 2011, we added the ag equipment, and we sell a whole lot more tractors than we do bulldozers. So that added a whole lot more dots to the map. And then if you look, our last full year was 2012. We've got equipment calling in from just about everywhere but the top of the Rocky Mountains. And if we extrapolate that to 2018, we're basically going to cover the entire country. But we are running into problems with coverage. As we said, we're trying to make cell phone calls from areas that haven't traditionally been covered. So our own empirical data is telling us that we've got about a 70% chance, roughly, of making that cell phone call on kind of an aggregate ratio basis. But if nothing's done, we're afraid it's going to drop to like 50% in a couple years at a time when we need it to be ramping up because we've got all these smart applications coming in. As I mentioned, we just went from 2G to 3G modem. It's almost the same thing that you saw with your own smartphones, right? We had voice-only phones that only had, limited data requirements. Smartphone came along in 2007, 2009, and the data requirements just went through the roof.
Right.
And we're going to see the exact same thing happen in agriculture.
So we talked about telecom and what they need to pay attention to. What about, we're here in the heart of DC, sitting, like, literally the new executive building is right there. What do we need to be doing it from here, from a policy perspective, if we can get this budget situation in order? What do we need to really see happening from a government, federal government perspective?
Well, let's maybe take them one at a time.
Okay.
So let's start with the FCC. Okay, on one hand, they run something called Universal Service Fund, which I think is a fantastic piece of policy, actually. It's absolutely essential for that to be adequately funded and functioning to bring rural communications to certain parts of the country. There's been some reforms made in that fund over the last couple years, and we started to look into that a little bit, and we're starting to get kind of nervous. After the reforms, we have anecdotal evidence from around the country where investment in capital investment in fixed broadband has dropped by 70 to 80%. Not 7 or 8%, 70 or 80%.
And that's not because things have been already built out? What's the...
Correct. No, this is because of regulatory uncertainty introduced into the USF process by these reforms at the FCC from 2 years ago. And we also have no anecdotal evidence where investment has increased at all in the last 2 years. So that makes us very nervous.
Yes.
So we would like that fixed.
Okay, so that was one. There was another possible, were you going to comment about another part of our government?
Well, we're just starting really to have a discussion with some members in Congress about this issue. On the House side, as part of the as part of the Energy and Commerce Committee, 18 congressmen have gotten together and they're calling themselves the Rural Telecom Working Group. So it's 9 from each party. Co-chairs are Congressman Latta and Welsh, and we've been in to see both of their offices as well as Renee Elmers from North Carolina. So we're starting to have a dialogue around some of these same issues with them, but I don't really have anything specifically to report on that yet.
Not yet.
But come back in 6 months.
Okay, that's a deal. And how about from a local, on a state level, regional level?
Good question. Turns out that about 26 states have their own version of a universal service fund, and some of them are states of interest to us out in the Midwest. So we might be taking a look at some project plans with some of those areas as well.
Okay. And so just taking a look in terms of opportunity, I mean, people are watching this because they want to see what kind of opportunities lie in different marketplaces and see, even if they're not necessarily agricultural companies, they can offer some service or solution or technology or something. So when you're looking at the broad spectrum and where things are going in the future, what would you say? Any kind of guidance in terms of just general trends that you're seeing that people might want to be paying attention to in this space?
Well, before I give you an answer, let me caveat this by saying I am not a business development person, okay? I used to do a lot of work, spectrum work for startup companies, most of which most people have probably never heard of. So that was one attraction to me in coming to work for John Deere. I've been around for 175 years. I figure not even I can bring down John Deere, right? So take this with a little grain of salt. But one of the things I think we're seeing is that the big data that we've talked about, being able to access this type of information that's never been available before, to me, that's got to increase opportunities and jobs for the agronomists, that's the right word, and similar type professions, as well as what I mentioned before about the rollover apps. I think there's going to be a tremendous opportunity for third-party applications to come in and fill some of the solutions and gaps in this space. Well,
Okay.
we can't do it all.
Right, that's great. Final words from John Deere for our look into the future also now from, let's say, maybe whether it's a spectrum, or where do you see John Deere actually growing in the near future? If you can talk about that, if you can not give too much away. Give us
Well, I mean, to be honest, I mean, we're going to be growing in spectrum. That's one reason why they've hired me here in Washington. The company's definitely moving more and more towards spectrum-dependent systems. I mean, we've only talked a little bit about what we're doing. We talked a little bit about GPS, and we talked about JDLink, but I mean, we've got other products that are based on 802.11 network standards that we haven't even mentioned, and more of that networked farm site is our general term for all of this. So it's machines that are talking to one another, it's sensors that are buried in the fields to do moisture content talking to one another, and just bringing more and more data and then analyzing it and then presenting it in a way to the farmer that allows them to make intelligent decisions. And that's what it's really all about.
So basically you're talking about the smart farm, in a sense.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
from the smart home, smart business, office building, smart farm.
Yep, absolutely.
And anywhere we could possibly imagine having sensors and capturing data and having machines feeding and helping one another and automating things,
And
that's what we're going to be.
It all needs spectrum. It's like the new value-added crop for John Deere.
So let me ask you this. Is John Deere going to actually start investing in spectrum, or investing in building out wireless networks itself, or invest in a company that's building out wireless networks, since it's going to go in that direction?
My sense is that we're going to stay building the iron and the services around that, and depend on third parties to provide that telecommunications connectivity, but we certainly need them to be able to fulfill our vision of the future.
Well, that's good. Stay focused on what you do best. That's the key for any company.
Yep.
Phenomenal. Mark, any final words that we should be keeping in mind, a question I haven't answered, or asked rather, answered, but asked?
Well, I guess I would just maybe to wrap up from my point of view, in that our problem in rural America, for example, is not a lack of spectrum, it's not a lack of technology, that's just a new
radio on an old tower. It's really just a lack of towers. We need more infrastructure. So that's really what our message is.
Yeah.
That and more, and look for count modems, not just people.
Great. So you heard it here. This is what we need to be paying attention to in agricultural M2M. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. And thank you so much for joining us here on U2U Connect Show on RCR TV. Stay tuned and keep coming back, because we always have new insights and explanations of what's happening in the Internet of Things.